starts to I'll let you answer that, sir. Right, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming on a rainy week to our meeting held here at the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies, a collaborative venture with the Solicitors International Human Rights Group and the Society for Advanced Legal Studies. We hold our meetings regularly here every month, and before I came up, I looked at the archives of the Solicitors International Human Rights Group and saw how many countries we've cast a spotlight on over the years. United States, Russia, Ukraine, Sri Lanka, Rwanda, Kenya, the United Kingdom, of course, on a number of occasions. Today it is Tanzania, and if we continue this program perhaps over the next 10 years, we might be able to focus on every country on the planet. I'm going to make an announcement about our next meeting first, because we usually forget to do so at the end of the meeting, and in any event people's attention has then faded. So on the 17th of June, we have a distinguished lineup of speakers addressing the issue of freedom of expression in the press, the case of David Miranda, Rwanda and the international picture. Amongst the speakers are Kate Gould of Bindman Solicitors, Karina Tertsakian of the Human Rights Watch, and Peter Norlander of Media Legal Defence Initiative. That again is at 6 o'clock, which is the usual time, on Tuesday the 17th of June. At the back of the lecture hall are a number of bulletins for the Solicitors International Human Rights Group, which I commend to you for all reasons, not least the fact that I'm a little fed up lugging them back and forth from my office immensely, so let me take one copy each. Well, let me now introduce our first speaker this evening, Evarist Chahali, who was born in Tanzania, worked in the state security services, is undertaking a doctorate study at the moment, and of course thus he has a special insight into issues concerning corruption and the observation of human rights in Tanzania, a country that receives perhaps little focus in British media. So we hope this evening, and led by him, we will learn a lot. So over to you, Everest. Thank you.
Good evening. I should say, when Sarah approached me to take part in this talk,
it started.
It was not an easy decision, because the situation as it is, although corruption attracts attention within and outside Tanzania, any attempt to make the situation public can have severe consequences. And I have actually been a victim of my focus in the problem of corruption in Tanzania. And my presentation would not be more of an academic, but rather of my own experience and thoughts about the problem of corruption in Tanzania. And unfortunately, I could not produce notes for every one of you. So you will have access, if anyone will be interested. This will be posted on the website, and you can have full access to it. So rather be referring to what I prepared, this 20-page presentation, and we'll try to balance in the time frame of 8 minutes. I began my presentation with a quote from a former civil servant in Tanzania, who summarized the situation as corruption is a right in Tanzania. And it's a norm, it's a way of life, it's acceptable, and the way probably is seen from the outside is so different from within the country. It's common to find a judge in capital Dar es Salaam being involved in corruption. And the Tanzanian would not feel offended, at least within Tanzania, if the situation is summed as everyone in Tanzania is corrupt. It doesn't feel as offensive because it is a way of life and acceptable as well. And corruption is so endemic that people have a perception that you can't access service without paying something. That's their own expectation. So without being bribed, people would still willingly offer something, favor or money to access whatever, the service or things they need. So rather than for a driver waiting for a year to have a driving license, they would rather pay 1,000 shillings, even without being asked for that, because that would make the long waiting shorter. So rather than focusing on people who solicit bribe, the society itself there's the willingness of people to offer bribe to get the services that would otherwise be offered for free. So the focus has been, in the talking about corruption, the focus has been more about institutions, more about the corrupt part, meaning those who are soliciting bribe or ask for bribes. But not much has been talked about the willingness of the people themselves to offer bribes without even being asked to. A few days ago, when Sarah sent me a flyer of this talk, I posted the flyer on Instagram account, and it was so discouraging because people, some friends, say that if corruption can't be fought within Tanzania, how someone who is based in the UK can do anything? So there's sort of like hopelessness, and there's also, and this is very frustrating, that it is like a fate. It's the fate of the country, and it's not affecting them as much as we tend to see. And for me, writing this essay was not easy because it brought back so much memories. I've been in the UK for about 12 years, and the last time I was in Tanzania for about 6 years. And unfortunately, I keep in touch with people in Tanzania and go through the media, and hardly a week will pass without coming across this discouraging news. But unfortunately, for majority, life just goes on, and people are not as concerned as probably some of us are. And what worries most for me is the fate of the country, the future of the country, if nothing is being done. And that motivated me to take part in this talk. So for Tanzanians, I tried to also define corruption, but in Tanzanian context. There's a popular saying in Tanzania, or saying rushwa ni adui wa haki. Corruption is an enemy of justice. So for many Tanzanians, corruption is an enemy of justice. What kind of justice? Having come from a socialist state, failed socialist state, issues of justice and human rights are not well embedded within the mindset or the knowledge of the people. So, in saying corruption is an enemy of justice, what kind of justice? So that in itself is a problem. However, there is still efforts to show that corruption is bad. For instance, all members of the ruling party, when people join the ruling party, known as Chama cha Mapinduzi, the Revolutionary Party, they make a pledge to not embrace corruption and they will fight corruption. But the funny thing is, the ruling party itself is, to many Tanzanians, synonymous with corruption. And to give a little example, recently there was an election of the youth wing, it's a children wing actually, a teenage wing of the party. And these are teenagers ranging from 10 to 13. And in there, they were put for, that when they gathered for the election, corruption, bribes exchanged hands. It was noted that some were given up to 30,000 things, probably just 100 pounds for voting. But this in itself is essential because these are teenagers, just 10 to 13 years, and corruption, they're being introduced to corruption that you can't become a leader, you can't have a position to serve without having been bought or paying for votes. And also went to look at the origins of corruption in Tanzania. And just like anywhere else, it's hard to pinpoint one particular or particular reason for the origins of corruption in society. But in Tanzania, there was a survey in 2011 that 54% of the interviewed had a view that corruption comes from leaders, and 29% attributed corruption to difficult life, while 16% thought that corruption is innate. That corruption has existed, quoting the words, as far as the times of Jesus. Now this is just 16%, but this is from a survey done in one region and involved just a few number of people. But I have a perception that probably this is one of the dominant mentality among majority of Tanzanians, that corruption has always been there. And you can't blame these people. They were born seeing corruption. Their parents buying things that otherwise should have been offered for free. They're born in the hospitals where services which should be offered for free has to be bought, has to be bribed. So for that matter, you wouldn't blame them thinking that corruption has been there and will probably be always there. And from the conversation I have had with people in Tanzania, there is a view that corruption is a means of survival, and that related with the economic hardship, the low wages, and for instance, a person earning 200,000 Tanzanian shillings a month would have to pay a rent which is almost 100,000 pounds, half of his monthly earning, and transport would cost him another 100,000 Tanzanian shillings, which would actually taken all of his earning per month, but he has to survive by food and other expenses. So there should be like a magical way that he can manage to sustain himself. Without talking about probably a single person, and this relates to myself having been working in Tanzania as a single person, but there are families, and African families tend to be extended. So a father with 5 children and this kind of earning. And not many people are actually working. The salaries themselves are really low. So it is a means of survival for some. And there is a link, it seems to be a link between poverty and corruption. Whereas various studies have shown that poverty encourages corruption causes poverty, and poverty would make someone vulnerable for corruption. However, the situation in Tanzania is a bit complicated because I've taken an example of the Tanzania Revenue Authority. That's one of the institutions who pay salaries of high standard, and it was expected that the reforms where the TRA, which included better benefit, better living conditions, would have discouraged workers in this organization from soliciting bribe. But unfortunately, the Tanzanian Revenue Authority is one of the leading corrupt institutions in Tanzania. So this has left people wondering whether it's all about hardship in life that encourage people to get involved in corruption, or there's more that could explain about why corruption is so embraced in the country. I try to also trace the origin of corruption. In Africa, we tend to see many of our problems as legacy of colonialism, and corruption is no exception. So there are people, there is a perception that the colonial rule had actually, especially the indirect rule in Africa, where the traditional chiefs were used to govern during the British colonial rule. And for the common citizens, people who were not connected to the colonial administration, had to bribe these colonial servants in order to access some of the services. However, in modern Tanzania, and not excluding the colonial administration in its role on the development of corruption in the country, 50 years after 50 years of independence have proved that if there is a blame to be put, then it is the current generation, the current administration, and it's more of a current situation rather than the past. For instance, there's a growing middle class in Tanzania, and the perception is that the middle class would encourage better governance, economic growth, and poverty reduction. And somewhat there is a hope, especially with on the technological area, as the people are trying to get into social media, calling for change and every sort of thing. But largely, the middle class embraces the same mentality as the people who are involved in corruption. instance, in the administrative capital of Dar es Salaam, the people who are into drug business are,
Yes, we're trying to get that off the screen.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I've got a bit of a problem.
People cherish criminals. For the Swahili word, it's in Zumba, like person who is involved in it's a status, like in a positive way. So people, and this is from the middle class. So the middle class, instead of being connecting efforts of the poor, but rather would impress the lifestyle and the way of the rulers, who most of them are corrupt, and probably the criminals as well. And that poses a difficult challenge in addressing the problem of corruption. There are, apart from looking at corruption as being, apart from looking at colonialism as being one of the reasons for millions of corruption in Tanzania, there is a view that the Ujamaa policy, which is a socialist vision of communism in Tanzania, had a role to play. The intentions were good. The founder of the nation, Julius Nyerere, was a person who believed in equality and emancipating the poor. However, the policy that took place from the independence 1961 to early 80s proved a failure. And there is a feeling that Nyerere resigned in 1985 after realizing that his Ujamaa exercise was a failure. However, during the Ujamaa era, while corruption was not as evident as it is now, the truth is the police had created a mass of poor who had no access to their basic needs, and a selected group of politicians and section of business people who had connection with the ruling party with a way that for the poor to access these things had to bribe them. And the decline of the state-controlled economy paved the way for the rise of an informal economy, with smuggling becoming rampant and corruption growing strong societal roots. I'll go through a little history, the changes of leadership in Tanzania and how it was related to corruption. So after Nyerere stepping down in 1985, was succeeded by Ali Hassan Mwinyi, and he's the one who introduced Tanzania to the liberalization policy and had agreed with the World Bank and the IMF to restructure the economy, which Nyerere had resisted. But to sum up Mwinyi's rule from 1985 to 1985 to 1995, his tenure was characterized by high degree of corruption, widespread tax evasion, and the country had no proper and disciplined monetary policy and witnessed a high inflation rate due to oversupply of cash in the economy. And when Mwinyi retired in 1995, he was succeeded by Benjamin Mkapa, who started with preparing to war on corruption and formed the Presidential Commission on Corruption known as the Warioba Commission. And the Commission's report led to adoption of a national anti-corruption strategy and action plan. However, when Mkapa left office in 2005, a lot came to be discovered, to be found out about what actually transpired during his leadership. Noted some of the major events, which include there was a coal mine that had been bought by him and one of his ministers at a takeaway price. But that was only came public after he left the office. And also, it's during Mkapa's era, when he was acting in office, that corruption was informally legalized. The same gift became legal in electoral system, that a candidate can entertain voters, but actually that was allowing corruption in the political system. Although the High Court later outlawed what is known as takrima, which is if the practice has still continued up to now. And probably as many of you would be aware of the involvement of a British firm, BAE, what is popularly known as the rubber scandal. That happened during the Mkapa era. And the transition from Mkapa to the current president, Jakaya Kikwete, also involved one of the hugest corruption scandals in Tanzania, where over 100 billion Tanzanian shillings was stolen from the central bank. And it is known that that money was, that funds were involved in the election, in the efforts to put Kikwete in power in 2005. Now the situation at the moment under President Kikwete is seriously bad. When he got into office, he had said quite clear that he knows the corrupt people, the people who are involved in corruption in Tanzania. But funny enough, he gave them a deadline. He said he knows the names, and he gives them time to change. So that in itself shows lack of seriousness, because these are, being a president and if you know people are involved in corruption, something should have been done. So he gave them a deadline which probably, which for many things was an indefinite deadline, because none has been prosecuted up to this moment. But the popular belief is Kikwete's campaign was financed by people who are known to be corrupt. And it would have been, probably he was right, he was telling the truth by saying he knows these people. But he couldn't go against them because they have been instrumental in his desire to become a president of Tanzania, which he did in 2005. And his lack of seriousness in the fight against corruption in Tanzania would also be shown in March 2009 when he visited the port of Dar es Salaam. And again, he said that he knows the names of people who are corrupt. And he promised he would pass the names to relevant authority, but nothing happened. In 2008, the police force in Tanzania had made a statement that they had completed an investigation of at least 100 people who are involved in drug trade. But it took until last year for President Kikwete to claim that he had actually passed the list to relevant authorities. So one doesn't have to know how powerful the president of Tanzania is, that he knows the name, and it takes from 2008 to 2013 to claim that he passed those names to, and nothing has happened. And actually, Kikwete's administration has turned Tanzania into a hub of drug trade, drug trafficking, human trafficking, and this is the international. At the moment, Tanzania is described as international hub of drug trafficking. Recently, there was a case in China where a number of Tanzanians were caught, but these would have been taken by people who are involved in human trafficking.
Okay, I'm going to ask you, Everest, to bring your presentation to any final conclusions you have at this stage. There may be time later, and there will be some questions later. Any further important points you want to make? If you could just wrap up now, so we've got time for Sarah and questions later.
With the picture pointed probably someone who was lost hope, and it is hard to explain about what is happening in the country, and with no hope of seeing this problem coming to an end. However, there have been some efforts, but these efforts don't seem to bear much fruit. The media has been quite instrumental, and probably Sarah will talk more about how the media has been trying, but on the other hand, the media in itself has been reduced corruption, but people have taken risks, have had a problem. My own problems with the government have been through the media. In writing, when I came here, the student in politics and seeing the situation in the UK encouraged me to reflect on what is happening here and what is actually happening in Tanzania. But have paid a huge price, and death threats and such kind of things. That should have actually pulled me back from probably talking about corruption, but it is our country, and if nothing is being done, the future is quite bad. And as for suggestions, I think there are two areas which can really help in at least addressing the problem of corruption and probably reducing. One is the role of donor countries, for instance, the UK. The good news, despite of lack of effort, is at the moment there is a corruption scandal which involved about 200 billion that have been stolen from the central bank. And the UK ambassador Tanzania has, the UK government would withhold an aid worth 71 million euros if the facts are not established about it. So this is quite positive, because I know the people who would have be affected are the poor, and I'm not calling for aid to be suspended, because I know who people, it's the average that will be affected. But that who is in their rightest mind will be just pouring this money, which is ending in the Swiss banks. At the moment, there's 300 billion Tanzanian shillings alleged to be in Swiss bank accounts. So now, as a Tanzanian, I'm a taxpayer. So the aid that I give to Tanzania, also I contribute towards that. So I feel that the UK government and other donor countries could do more in putting pressure to the leadership. And the final point, because of the time, I worked for the Tanzanian Intelligence and Security Service. I still have faith in this organization. It's one of the strongest law enforcement agencies, not only in Tanzania, in Africa. And that would be looked at the perspective of the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa and the security situation in Tanzania. That would prove how strong it is. And it is still strong, but the thing is it's very politicized and it is working as a security wing of the ruling party. This institution has strong links with the Western intelligence agencies. Here, the UK, the British, American, and others, and has a lot of resources. But because it's too politicized, it is hindered from performing its work. And also, there's a legislative matter that the Tanzanian Intelligence and Security Service can only advise and can't sort of enforce its findings or wishes. So probably in the future, it would have been it would be useful for looking at the legislative issues as to enable Tanzanian Intelligence and Security Service put its findings into actions. And finally, this is from the bottom of my heart that it's important to understand that the future of Tanzania is at stake if the current endemic corruption is left to prevail. There's a popular saying in Swahili, a popular belief that in Tanzania that if we do nothing to save our country, our grandchildren will in future vandalize our graveyards because we left them with nothing except for its name. In Tanzania is actually, if the situation prevails, it's hard to say how the country will be, say, in the next 10 years.
Okay. We'll move on about that. We'll come back to questions later. Everest has mentioned his notes and he's promised a web version. That will be on our website within about 7 days to get the podcast. And that website is easy to remember, I hope. sihrg.org, search.org. Takes me now to introduce Sarah Hermitage, who qualified as a solicitor in England and Wales, and then undertook a career in a number of teaching posts, including Kent University, and also appointments to various organisations in the voluntary and charity sector, travelled the world, worked and lived in a number of different countries, settling for a number of years in Tanzania with her husband, Mr. Middleton, where they acquired by lease a farm intended to grow crops and were hounded out in 2008. Their personal story of their experience can be read by the judgment of Justice Bean of November 2012. It's on the British and Irish legal database, that I'll put a link to that also on the web page within 7 days at search.org. So this gives Sarah a particular poignant insight into the conditions of corruption and human rights in Tanzania. So delighted to hear from her next.
Thank you. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's very grateful to come in this evening. If we have more than 2 people, we'll be very happy. So we have got more than 2. Maybe somebody smaller. Please welcome 2. I don't sit here and speak to you as an eminent lawyer or an eminent academic or economist. But I do talk to you as somebody that is legally trained and has a background in policing. Those 2 things were probably my downfall at the end of the day, because we recognised what was happening to us in Tanzania and we were able to fight it. I think most investors, on the first experience we had in Tanzania, would simply run. I'm sure they would. I don't think there's probably any British person that has suffered the abuse of law in Tanzania that we have, and neither would I want them to. We faced literally a tidal wave of corruption in Tanzania, and I don't intend to dwell on my case. This is not a platform for my case. This is a platform to introduce you to the serious human rights abuses that are taking place in Tanzania, and the fact that a lot of people are ignoring it. And I think, with due respect, there's quite a good turnout tonight, but for the amount of publicity this issue has got, I think a lot of people don't realise just how serious the problem is, and the fact that the British government are supporting it with copious amounts of aid. Now, Everest has talked about corruption in the abstract, about grand corruption, etc., etc. What I want to talk about tonight is how corruption impacts on lives in Tanzania, particularly poor lives and people that don't have access to legal services, and how it is a superb way of denying access to law and therefore human rights. And there are going to be some PowerPoint presentations. You've probably seen them all actually. It's not going to be death by PowerPoint. There'll just be illustrations to show you tonight that corruption is not a victimless crime. And I do tweet, not very professionally, but a lot of Tanzanians have tweeted to me this week that please, please, please tell the audience that corruption in Tanzania is not a victimless crime. It is the grand corruption, but it pervades every aspect of life in Tanzania for your average person on the street. Now, when you talk about Tanzania, the word evokes different images for different people. And for tourists, dreams of sunsets in the Serengeti, and indeed, that's fantastic. For climbers, and many of you maybe have climbed Kilimanjaro, the slopes of Kilimanjaro. And perhaps more relevantly at the moment, for the energy-hungry world, substantial reserves of oil and gas. Now, President Kikwete came to power in 2005, and he came to power on the back of vocal anti-corruption rhetoric. He gave assurances of good governance, and he trumpets ceaselessly to the donor and investment community that Tanzania is now the investor destination of choice. Quite frankly, the investor destination Tanzania is a land of milk and honey. If I was to say more appropriately, probably the land of oil and gas. Kikwete states the business environment in Tanzania to be permissive. But all the evidence suggests that Kikwete simply is not delivering on his promises on curbing corruption, for whatever reason. In 2014, allegations of grand corruption remain rampant in the country. I'm not going to go into details. As Everest, I'll have a sheet, and if you want the references to what I'm talking about tonight, they will be based somewhere that will be available to you. President Kikwete is providing little more than rhetorical evidence of his anti-corruption stand. And certainly our own experience in Tanzania belies the commitment he states he has towards curbing corruption in the country, and particularly to the rule of law. And if you dig through the rhetoric, a very disturbing picture emerges of corruption in Tanzania. It ranks 111 on Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index, and it's fallen from 88 in 2005 when Kikwete first came to power. In the East African Bribery Index, the police and judiciary are amongst the most corrupt institutions in East Africa, and the World Bank, doing a business report, places Tanzania second to the bottom in the East African community. It does fare slightly better in world terms, but certainly in East Africa it doesn't. The Tanzanian legal system is quite simply putrid with corruption. I mean, I can use as many adjectives as you'd like me to use, but that sums it up. And much of the evidence for that comes from within Tanzania itself. There are numerous studies, as I say, which will be posted on the internet, but there is one particular one which is of significant interest and is quite recent, which is an NGO in Tanzania called the Legal and Human Rights Centre, which are quite outspoken up to a point. Now, they produced a human rights report in 2013, and they raised the issue of human rights, stating there are serious abuses of human rights in the country. It is a serious challenge, and there is a fundamental problem with access to law, which is what I'm specifically concerned with here. And they raise as a particular concern, and I think it is relevant to raise it, a statement by Prime Minister Pinda, on August 20th, 2013, who was responding to a question in Parliament. I'm actually not sure what the question was, but his response did make headlines in Tanzania. Now I'll read it first, and then it's so incredulous that I've asked David to then put it up on the overhead projector so that you can actually satisfy yourself that it's actually true. And he stated, if you make trouble and you are told not to do that, and you decline, you will just be beaten. Because there is no other way yet. We have to agree on one thing, that the country is run under the rule of law. Now, if you decline and think that you are the strong one, and you are the most stubborn, they will beat you, and I say, just beat them, because there is no other way, we are fed up. So, this actually, if we can see it, you've probably already seen it, but it's actually on, what's coming up now, but there's a Swahili version of that on the Legal and Human Rights, in the Legal and Human Rights Court as well. So I think it's fairly accurately it's translated. Now, just have a look at that, and then with the black fly, so you don't hear about the rest of the evening. Yeah. So, I mean, I think the salient point there is that Pinder did not resign. I mean, if you can imagine, this was a statement by David Cameron, and I think perhaps he might not be there the day after he made it. He was not called upon to resign, which I think is important, when clearly the statement offended the rule of law and all standards of human decency. Now, the statement was unfortunate objectively, but in terms of what was going on in Tanzania at the time, it was even more serious because it came in the wake of the police killing of a journalist called Daudi Mwangosi. Now, Daudi was brutally murdered by the police on the 2nd of September 2013, and his only crime, seemingly, was being a journalist. He had a gas canister fired into his stomach. Now, if that wasn't enough, 6 other police officers then proceeded to beat him to a pulp, leaving him dead in the dirt. Now, I'm going to show these pictures, and if any of you are squeamish, then please don't look. And the reason I'm showing them is not for any sensational value, but if Daudi's death is going to mean anything, we have to show the brutality of what is going on in Tanzania. So, David, if you'd like to show you the picture of Daudi first, I mean, and he was married, by the way, and so his death has brought, obviously, the most horrendous suffering in his family. Now, this is the significant picture. The next one is of him actually being beaten. Now, it's not a very clear picture, but I think you can see at least 8 police officers there, and that's going to be significant. They're literally just beating the man to death. I mean, and the next one, which is the one you don't want to look at and don't look, is how he was left. So, if we have a black slide, I think that sums it up. One junior officer is reported to have been charged with this offence. I can't really find out any further details than that, but as far as I know, the case is still pending and nobody has been convicted. There was more than one officer there, as you can see quite clearly. But unconfirmed media Council of Tanzania reports that the officer who oversaw the police presence at the rally where David Daudi was killed has now been promoted to Deputy Commissioner of Police, but I can't substantiate that now. The death was the first in a number of killings of journalists. The Committee to Protect Journalists documents 10 serious attacks on journalists since 2012. There was the brutal attack of Dr. Stephen William Bolto, who spoke out against the miners' strike, I think it was last year, 18 months ago. And there are others, and I haven't mentioned them for time reasons, but they're no less serious than these. But one significant one was the attack on the chairman of the Tanzanian Editors Forum, Absalom Kibanda. He lost his left eye in the attack against him. several teeth were knocked out of his head, and a finger on his left hand was hacked off. Now, this attack happened a few days before he and a couple of other journalists were due to appear in court charged with offences of treason for publishing seditious articles in 2011. And I think you've got a slide there of, that's Absalom. He's flown down to South Africa, where in fact he was visited by President Kikwete, who gave him his assurance that whoever had attacked him would be found. As far as I know, nobody has been charged or convicted of his attack. Now, as a result of this, thanks David for the Blackman. As a result of this, Tanzania has gone down obviously in the press freedom rankings, and in 2013 the World Press Freedom Index they've fallen 36 places, and they're now ranked 70 out of 179. This, following on the heels, also of Pinder's beating was Operation Tomakeza, which was an anti-poaching, which again, for many of you know about Tanzania, is quite high profile. The anti-poaching initiative consisted of about 3,000 Tanzanian security personnel, which seems to have been made up with militia, in my experience in Tanzania, simply thugs, People's Defence Force, local police, etc., supposedly to address anti-poaching, which seems to have turned into an excuse for unchecked thuggery. The operation brought allegations of brutal rapes, murder, torture and extortion, and a parliamentary inquiry found 13 people have been murdered and thousands of livestock maimed and killed. I think slide 9 shows, in terms of time, I'm not going to read out the press statement on this, but this was one of the anti-poaching raids in the local area. So having set the scene for any kind of access to law in Tanzania, I'm just going to look briefly at how it plays out at the grassroots level, and how corruption impacts on the right to be dealt with equally and fairly before the law. I haven't got time to discuss the High Court here, but I'm going to briefly look at the police, the arrest and charging processes, and the courts, i.e. magistrate courts, clerks, magistrates, lawyers. In terms of arrest, obviously we all know that as citizens we have rights when we're being arrested, to know why we're being arrested, and time limits for being held in detention and so forth. More often than not in Tanzania, these rights are denied. There are various reasons for that. In the main, police probably don't know what they are. Arrests are often arbitrary, at a whim. People are not told why they're being arrested. They're never told. They're never cautioned. They're not given access to legal representation. And of course, a particular concern in this area are juveniles and vulnerable people, of course. And arrest is often a very brutal and frightening experience in Tanzania, and I know that from personal experience. Charging process, again, non-compliance with statutory provisions, no charge sheet, fabricated charge sheets. The charging process is very often, or more often, not skipped altogether. The suspect or the person is taken direct to the court, where the charge will simply be fabricated on the spot. It may or may not have been in the law. It's simply not relevant at the time. I mean, you can see here that in the police and judiciary, magistrates, clerks, etc. Very often the corruption is mutually exclusive, but very often there's a continuity of corruption throughout the whole penal and judicial process when somebody decides they want somebody arrested. And so there's continuity through the clerks, through the magistrates, through the judges, etc. So we kind of follow one follows on from the other. And an example that I think I've got time to mention is my husband, Stuart, which draws all this together. He was asked to go to the Moshi police station with a member of the staff. I can't mention the staff member because it would put his life in danger. He was asked to go and discuss a witness statement he had made in terms of a complaint he had made against another person. He was interrogated for 8 hours. not allowed to leave the station. He wasn't cautioned. As far as he was concerned, he was discussing his witness statement. And then he was released after 12 hours. 2 days later, he was asked to go back to the police station. He was directed to the forward office with the other man, and they were both told they'd been arrested. They were told why. When they asked why, they said, "You know why." He was marched through the streets of Moshi at gunpoint. This is an investor in Tanzania. Marched through the streets of Moshi with 2 AK-47s by his side and an innocent Tanzanian also by his side. He was placed in a cage at the district court. 2 police officers stood outside the cage. They refused to tell me why my husband had been arrested. A representative from the British High Commission came down. They refused to tell him why he'd been arrested. So he was held in the cage for 2 hours until the courts had closed. It was now about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He was then marched again through the streets of Moshi to another court, again at gunpoint. The whole process was a humiliation process. And he was placed in what was supposedly a courtroom. There was a magistrate, there were journalists from local media there. There was no charge sheet. The proceedings were a complete pantomime. The cast, magistrates, police, prosecutors, journalists. The magistrate even allowed me to represent them. I've got no rights of audience in Tanzania, I'm a representative, but she even allowed me to represent my husband in this particular Tanzania. I asked for a charge sheet, asked the police for a charge sheet, hadn't got one, so she just carried on regardless. Now, it is funny, but at the end of the day, there's a very serious side to this, because this is what Tanzanians face every day of their lives in Tanzania. And if my husband faced it in the face of the British High Commission stepping in to help, what on earth goes on with the average Tanzanian? Now, the charge sheet was produced 3 days later when the British High Commissioner Philip Parham asked the DPP to produce it. So you've got 2 men arbitrarily arrested, unlawfully imprisoned, or wrongfully imprisoned, plastered with the local media. I mean, this stuff even made the British Tanzanian Society. I had to write to the British Tanzanian Society and ask them to remove it from their newsletter. So, it's got serious implications. I'd like David actually to put the charge sheet up so I can show you exactly what went on. Now, I've taken out, I don't want any, I've taken out whoever it was that it should be. I don't want you to look at who's been named. And you might have difficulty reading it, but it's uttering a bounced check, contrary to section 332, section C1 of the Penal Code, cap 16, of the laws as amended by Act number 2 of the year of 1991. Now, there's no offence under the Penal Code of Tanzania of uttering a bounce check. Section 332C, 1, does not exist, and Section 332 relates to threats to burn down a haystack. Now, bearing in mind we've got our life savings invested in this country, and this is what we're being subjected to. The charge sheet reads that Section 331 has been amended by Act number 2 of the year 1991. Well, what Act? Act number 2 of year 1991. What Act? No amendment was made to the Penal Code in 1991. So these charges were completely utterly fabricated. Now I'm showing you one. We faced 14 of this and had a defamation suit brought against us for $90,000 in Tanzania, and the whole of our property in Tanzania confiscated under this kind of corrupt due process. Now, the police officer remained in situ to deal with all the other 14 cases that were brought against us. And as far as I know, they're still there. I mean, 7 years later, last week, we received a summons to appear in court. Last week, after 7 years. So there was a second charge sheet which actually tried to accuse us of forging our own lease. Well, I mean, I won't go into details of the legalities of that, but it was our property and we paid the money. So. DPP immediately dropped these charges as soon as he was informed about them by the British High Commission. But no apology was given. It was put into high-profile media and left on the internet for 3 years. As I say, it appeared in the British Tanzanian Society newsletter. And And 2 men were unlawfully arrested, wrongfully imprisoned, and their reputations seriously damaged. So moving on swiftly to the magistrates' court, clerks, magistrates and lawyers. Well, clerks, losing documents, consider the implications of that. Persons in prison awaiting court proceedings, awaiting bail proceedings. The whole purpose of this kind of corruption is to keep the individual in prison. That person may or may not come out, depending on who's engaging in corruption. They might get poisoned or get killed in prison. And that is just simply not an exaggeration. Manipulation of trial folders, abusing filing dates in respect of time limits for applications. I have waited outside the High Court in Moshi. I've just sat there all day, every day for a week, knowing that I'm never going to get that application heard, but it was just the only way that I could make it go ahead. Conclusion. So that's that kind of lawyers as well. I haven't got time. Well, I will just briefly show how lawyers manipulate due process. And we nearly lost our farm in the very early stages because of this application. It was made in the District Land and Housing Tribunal, which is a very low, it's not a court, it's a tribunal, and it's not even chaired by a lawyer. It's chaired by the chairman, who incidentally asks us for a bribe before the proceedings went forward. But it's got a jurisdiction of 50,000 50 million shillings, which was about $38,000 at that point. Now you can see that, I think it's in, you see number 4. The estimated value of the property is 50 million Tanzanian shillings. But if you go down further, you will see that this is a breach of contract case for $112,000. Now, on the face of it, that should never have been entertained. Or you can put it on the other side so you can see it there. It should not have been entertained by the court. It shouldn't have even been filed. We appealed to the District Land and Housing Tribunal on ground of jurisdiction. They refused. So we then had to pay $8,000. We're trying to invest in this country and provide jobs and services. We had to then spend money, $8,000, employing a lawyer from Dar es Salaam to come and defend us. Months of harassment and abuse ensued, and eventually the High Court and Land Division threw out his claim. But the sting in the tail was we were left to pay our own costs. Now, under Tanzanian law, the judge is supposed to give reasons why you've been left to your own costs. No reason given. It's actually given, on 100% unrepresented, and so that is one case. We faced 15 of those. We were mentally and physically broken. We stayed as long as we could, but I'm afraid everyone has their limits. So to conclude, in any functioning democracy, obviously the rule of law is the political framework that protects the constitution and the contractual rights of the people, and it holds the organs of states to account. It needs to operate independently, to be consistent and abide by international treaties and conventions that the state has entered into in respect of governance and human rights. Now, the vital institutions within this framework are, of course, the police and the judiciary. A functioning police force and a robust judiciary are guarantors of free and fair access to law, and they're powerful weapons against corruption. Due to the high levels of corruption in Tanzania, the administration of justice is simply not fit for purpose. The very institutions mandated to protect the rights of the people are, through a culture of corruption and impunity, used to deny them. It is as if justice is bought and sold on the open market. Those who don't have access to power do not have access to justice. A friend and former British official in Kenya has a badge given to him by a civil society activist there, which says quite simply, why bother to hire a lawyer when you can buy a judge? Now, I'm afraid this statement is as appropriate for Tanzania as it is for Kenya, perhaps more so now. Abuses of law are dismissed with the response, we cannot interfere with the judiciary. A perfectly constitutional method of legitimising the abuse of power and corruption and denying access to law. What the system's defenders are saying is, you can't have access to law and we can't interfere with the judiciary. Therefore, attempting to access justice in Tanzania is simply like swimming in treacle. Everywhere you go, you get stuck, and in the end, you are so exhausted, you simply sink. As Peter Msigwa, Shadow Minister for Natural Resources, tweeted last week, in a corrupt system like Tanzania, the influential get bailed and the rest get jailed. He's right, of course, but you have to consider who are the rest. They are simply those that do not have access to power. They are you, they are me, they are the poor, the vulnerable, and those whom the law is also mandated to protect. And if you remember the great Chief Justice Coke, who put the law above the king, the fight he had then 400 years ago is a fight that is still being fought. It is an ongoing struggle even now. Wherever elected presidents and unelected officials interfere with the independence of judges, the rule of law is threatened. Now, corruption is always a pervasive and complex problem wherever it appears, but that does not mean it has to be tolerated. The Department for International Development states that in the last decade, Tanzania has seen strong progress in access to basic services. Now, this is an irresponsible and inaccurate statement in respect of access to law. Between June 2006 and June 2012, the British taxpayer will have donated £670 million in direct budget support to Tanzania. £30 million of that alone was intended to strengthen civil society. Yet the country cannot even deliver a fair trial for its citizens. Donors turn a blind eye to corruption, and their aid ignores or even supports the injustice. And whilst the Tanzanian government continues to receive oceans of aid and praise for its rhetorical commitment to good governance, its people drown in corruption. In April of this year, In April of this year, President Kikwete came to London. He courted high-profile audiences and talked up Tanzania to the British investment community. His scriptwriters did him proud, and he left the British investment community in no doubt that Tanzania was the land of investor, milk and honey. Your investment is safe in our hands, Kikwete intoned. He states that investments are guaranteed against nationalisation and expropriation by multilateral investment guarantees such as the International Centre for the Settlement of Investment Disputes, Exile, for those that are aware of it. These are important reassurances for large investors such as BG Group and Warfare Energy. They signed memorandums of understanding with the government of Tanzania during Kikwete's visit, securing multi-million-pound offshore gas deals. Now, such companies may feel that they have the economic clout to survive in Tanzania without recourse to treaties such as Exile. But they will do well to note that the High Court of Tanzania this week has just stayed the execution of an Exile ruling. And this move, if confirmed, will mean that no investor objectively is safe in Tanzania. Now, I wish them luck, because they have actually just had a case filed against them, a constitutional case in the High Court. So good luck to them. Now, of President Kikwete's visit, William Hague stated, "I am delighted at the growing partnership of Tanzania and the UK on a number of fronts." But if you read the speech, you only actually comment on one front. Tanzania offers opportunities for British business and is set to become a major global supplier of gas. But what he did not say, and what he should have said, was, "Mr. President, we are excited at the prospect of doing business with Tanzania, but we are concerned by the condition of human rights in the country. We feel your government could do more to address these weaknesses, and if there is no progress towards transparent and accountable governance, we shall reconsider our aid and investment to Tanzania. Well, many of you might think that's naive, but isn't it exactly what he has recently said to Putin in regard to his conduct in Ukraine? Now, BG Group's ethical conduct policy sets out 8 guiding principles. The policy is absolutely fine, but it has no value whatsoever in deeply corrupt societies if it's not practiced outside the corporate box. Issues of human rights and access to law transcend borders and should transcend profit margins. An eminent historian reminds us that democracy will produce decent government in the hands of decent people, but in the hands of cannibals, it will produce governments of cannibals. I truly looked into the eyes of evil in Tanzania, and I chose to confront that evil at great personal cost, both to me, my family, and decent Tanzanians who we employed in the country. But it is the cost that I'm prepared to pay, because it's only by confronting that evil that you can keep it at bay. So let us end by remembering the well-used but powerful words of the statesman Edmund Burke. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And let's all do something, no matter how small. As a start, let's go home tonight and give some thought to what we've discussed this evening, and think about how, in some small way, we can promote civil society so that the powerless in countries such as Tanzania may have hope of a better future. That's the end.
From Evarist Chahali, a necessarily compact but very useful overview of the political and historical conditions giving rise to corruption in Tanzania, not unfamiliar pattern in many other countries around the world, combined with an insight into how all-pervasive corruption affects the lives of most, if not all, Tanzanians. And from Sarah Hermitage, we've heard based on very concrete examples and personal experience the devastating effect that corruption had on lives, again, an exposure to many levels of hypocrisy, both in Tanzania and in the international community, allowing that situation to continue unabated. But now, time for questions. Michael Lionel.
Thank you both very much for this fascinating but very sad account of what's going on. I've had a close connection with Tanzania for many, many years, and during the time of Nyerere, things were, I think, rather different. I wonder to what extent things have actually gone down. And secondly, I wonder whether any international action has been taken, for example, before the UN Human Rights Council, where Tanzania gets examined every 5 years, I think it is, on its human rights situation. I wonder whether you, or indeed the Legal Resources Centre that you mentioned,
Legal Human Rights Centre.
That's right, the Legal Human Rights Centre, whom I know, whether you, anybody has presented a counter report or taken up the challenge there, because it seems to me that could be a possible way of getting more human rights recognised in Tanzania. Finally, do you have any sign of hope in the country which used to be such a beacon for human rights under Nyerere? Either of you.
I think, as far as I know, there was a Tanzanian, anonymous, he disclosed his name, who had compiled a report of human rights abuse in Tanzania and submitted to the US Senate committee. That story, I don't know what transpired after that, but one of the things that is noticeable is it's a lot of courage and not being fear of the risk to come up with any measures against the corruption. We're talking about rulers, powerful rulers in Tanzania. So if anything happened and I'll see the role of the donor countries and international organization rather than one from Tanzania. It's almost impossible unless you want to risk your life. So the human rights and civil society in Tanzania is quite weak, and it's also quite corrupt. But also there's an element of any organization that seems to be fighting for the poor is like treason or something. So it's hard. And for your last part of the question, for myself, I feel like it would take lives, it would take torture, it would take beatings. I am at the moment coming here with, against the advice of police of Scotland. They started because I had a threat against myself. But for me, I'm doing this for my country, so whatever that happens to me, I just wish our fellow Tanzanians would think this has to be taken. I still have, it may not happen during our time, but it may still happen. There is a sign of hope with some mindset. And most inspiring is people like Sarah, what they're doing for our country. Just hope that the people out there work on something like this.
Sarah, can you help on the UN?
No, I'm sorry, I can't. As far as I know, no. But the Legal and Human Rights Centre,
They must do something.
They-
sure.
they are not in a position to do it because of the abuse and intimidation. I think there's so many good people in Tanzania that do want to do something. I think that's unquestionable. But during my rival trial, which I'm going to go into, but the communications that I had in private were that they were just terrifying. You know, sorry.
Gentleman there, sorry,
Every sub-Saharan country has got a variety of these institutions that are anti-corruption, etc. They range from the Suleiman sellers in South Africa, probably the only thing body that's standing up to corruption anyway, to some other extremes. Where does the anti-corruption commission in Tanzania come in? Where do they stand on the litmus paper of effective, ineffective?
They're corrupt. I think that really, if you excuse me, that the example I'll give you on that, I mean, are you aware of the BAE case?
Yeah.
Yeah. The head of the PCCB, which is the main anti-corruption body, it's run by a guy called Exile, who actually informed Kikwete of the legitimacy of our case, which nothing was done. He spoke out and said no Tanzanian was involved in the BAE. So that kind of sense of powers. That they are good people. I don't actually think that is a particularly good organisation. Their hands are tied. They cannot do anything. It's literally swimming equal.
Yes, I'm from Tanzania myself, but I had two questions. The first to Sarah. What do you think is the contribution of international companies in making sure that the legal system in Tanzania is weak? Because similarly, I'm very sorry for your case, but we know that the sort of Barrick gold, they abuse people in villages, and still they can't let those people to use other courts or other jurisdiction out of Tanzania. And similarly, what do you, when you look at corruption in that extent, because most of the big scandals, this may be, for example, there's a report which came last week, Tanzania loses about 30% of its GDP, equivalent to GDP, due to tax misinvoicing by international companies. Which, of course, I think that money could have gone to the country and helped to strengthening the legal system. How do you see the role of international companies as well who...
Yes. Well, it's an interesting question because I had occasion to write to the chairman of BG Group last week, Andrew Gold, and I asked him if he would assist me in gaining access to justice in Tanzania. And the response from him and the response from the chairman of Coca-Cola both of those are in a very good position, actually, and in my view, have moral responsibility to engage with governments on human rights issues, even if they occur outside their own border box. But they won't, because it's going to affect their profit margin. That's the reality.
Is it only their profit margin, or they are part of the system which is making the legal system weaker?
Well, I think
Because if you go, you look at the big profile case, some of them, let alone that's committed maybe by the government, but the local poor who are more affected with the resource acquisition, you'll find out most of them maybe are committed by foreign companies. And maybe those the same poor people, they don't have the power to fight with this market.
Yeah, I mean, I'm aware of what's going on in Barrack Hill at the moment, but obviously I don't want to comment on it. Corruption is not a black crime, I've seen foreign investors in Tanzania actually employ people to avoid their taxes, and I mean, let's be perfectly honest here, they're all part of the whole system. I don't necessarily think that companies such as British Gas are involved in that kind of corruption. I mean, I don't think they are for 1 minute, but I do think they have a responsibility to address it outside their box. Does that answer the question?
Yes, can I ask a quick question to
Yes.
Chahali?
And then behind you are.
Charlie, since you've been in the intelligence services, and I have heard you a few times quoting that some of the intelligence services are logged. So how are they involved with the whole corruption system, or how do they support, how this log system support the corruption system in Tanzania?
From my experience is the intelligence agency in Tanzania knows what is happening, and that's their role, keeping the country safe. And corruption is making Tanzania more safe. So actually, prevalence of corruption in Tanzania is very low of the intelligence agency, but it's not as it looks. There's some legal, the legislation itself gives the president the power to decide on the intelligence that is offered by the TIS. But, however, getting into the details, the intelligence is in a position to influence the decision. In an African setting at least, they can influence their reports or findings to the government. So the stumbling block is its role anyway is advisory. It remains like an advisory role. It investigates, analyzes the reports, and then it's left to the president to make decisions, and the decision has not been made. So there are ways, we say, that not really necessarily protesting or anyway. It's more kind of like legal and some practical issues. But we still put all the intelligence agencies having failed in deliver. It's more political rather than independent organization for the benefit of the nation. That's
Another question?
Hello, thank you. I'm also from Tanzania, and